So we have some wonderful presenters today. We'll be hearing from people working in wildlife organisations, what's happening in some research around the area, as well as hearing from local and state government as well. So I'm not going to stand up here and talk for too long. I'll introduce our lovely first guest speaker. We have Rosemary Booth, who's actually the breeding program manager here at the Hidden Vale Wildlife Centre. So Rosemary is a wildlife veterinarian with 4 decades of experience. In her role at Hidden Vale, she manages the breeding and reintroduction of threatened species in collaboration with other conservation stakeholders. So I will...
Oh, there's a microphone. Good. I'm going to talk to you today in a somewhat depressing way because I want to provide a reality check on what koalas are facing in southeast Queensland, particularly urban koalas. And then I'll try and finish with some positives so that people don't get sad and leave before the other speakers get a chance. So koalas, their future is in our hands. Everything that goes wrong for koalas is because of us. So here's my view of the world. So for 40 million years, koalas got by just great without humans, and they faced amazing threats like giant carnivorous marsupials, goannas the size of buses, and they continued unabated for 40 million years, and they gradually evolved to specialise in feeding on this vast resource of eucalyptus leaves that's available to them in Australia. And they had very few competitors because no one else wants to eat that rubbish. So 40 million years of success. Humans arrived about 40,000 years ago and still didn't make a major impact on them because of the way that hunting occurred and the way that fires were managed. The koalas weren't severely impacted, and also the human population density was very low. Then this happened and everything went worse at a faster rate. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with this photograph. It's very famous. If you're not, I'll just explain it again. But there was a depression on, and in this month of 1927, 10,000 licenses were given out in just the state of Queensland to harvest koalas as a resource. And all of those koala skins were sent to America to be turned into hats and gloves and coats. There's differing views of how many animals were killed in this process, but there's figures that suggest that there could have been 3 to 5 million koalas harvested from southeast Queensland. So if you think about the genetic impact of that many animals being removed from the population, I believe that we are still experiencing the effects of that decision to this day. See, I am depressing. Here's some more. So the other threatening processes that koalas are facing now that are getting worse is the impact of climate change. So you're well aware of the impacts of droughts, and this photo is from the 1920s fire from the koala habitat in New South Wales. So you can imagine that a koala facing that kind of wildfire doesn't have a chance of surviving, and we don't even know for certain how many animals were lost in that event because there's no evidence left. They are completely incinerated. There's just ash. So the impact of the climate change and the fires of 2019, 2020 will never be fully understood. But yay, the federal government has made them endangered, and so that's an acknowledgement of what, to the extent of the loss. Urbanisation is another extremely serious threatening process. These are koalas from my previous job was at Australia Zoo Wildlife Hospital. These are animals that were rescued by the Australia Zoo rescue team. So a koala is hardwired to find something vertical with a fork in it. These are young koalas. They've left their mothers and set off in an urban environment to find somewhere to live. And this is what they find. And the little confusion on their faces still breaks my heart when I look at it. It's just more and more animals, or the youngsters that are born in an urban environment, have to find somewhere to live, and this is where they end up. And that's what it looks like from the air. The koala never gets to see it like that, so they have no idea. They're setting off on foot. They don't know that that's what they're facing. And this is a particularly pretty part of Brisbane with a golf course and some green space, but there's not many places to be a koala. So the hospital data is really useful to review the whole scenario for koalas in southeast Queensland. So there's 100,000 wild animal patients have been admitted to that hospital since 2004, or more than 100,000 now. And of those, 10,000 were koalas. This was analysed in 2021. Of those 10,000 koalas, 4,000 were presented in a state where they could be rehabilitated and returned to the wild. So of those animals that returned to the Moreton Bay Regional Council, Brisbane, let's call it Brisbane, more than 1,000 were lost from that Moreton Bay Regional Council. So the reason why I used that picture of that koala, she's another dispersing juvenile, so she's about 2 years old. Look at her face. How is she going to figure out how to find somewhere to live in an environment crisscrossed with roads, dogs, and a distinct lack of connected forest? Stop me if I'm making you all too sad. So I'll just step back here. Can you see the number up the top is rolling through from 2012 to 2021? So this is Moreton Bay Regional Council, and these are the koalas being admitted to Australia Zoo Hospital by year. And I think what this shows you is the koalas are all very much coming from this area of maximum urbanisation. There is obviously a limit to how frequently that many koalas can go to a hospital and be put back into that environment. And I think that limit is behind us. Gosh, I'm fun. I know why they invited me to speak.
Glad you're not finishing.
Sorry?
I'm glad we're not finishing with you.
Yeah, the other speakers will have to cheer up the mood. These are the dead koalas from Moreton Bay Regional Council. Each one of those little koala emojis is a deceased koala from the period of time from 2012 to 2021. You will see the main roads that they occur along. But I think the take-home message is more than 1,000 koalas from that one little urban environment of Brisbane, Moreton Bay Regional Council. And each year, there's a downward trend. There's not a downward trend in the number of our koalas dying because things are better. There are less koalas to die. So, key messages. Urban koalas are in serious trouble. The legislation that currently requires us to put them back within 1 to 5 kilometres of where they were rescued is putting them in imminent danger. It costs approximately $10,000 to hospitalise a koala with disease or injury. So we're wasting lots of koalas and money when we rehabilitate them and put them back into a bad environment. So, some happiness. What are we doing here at Vale to try and address that issue? And this predates me because I only just got here. So I can't take any credit for what they're doing here. So we want to contribute to provide a home for koalas that have lost their homes in the urban environment. So the first thing you would need to do to make a useful contribution is to know what koalas are already here in the existing habitat and is there capacity to put more koalas here. So there's an ecological study underway. Is Carmen in the room? How many years have we been doing this?
4.
For 4 years. So Carmen should really be giving this part of the talk, but I think she'd be happy if I keep talking on her behalf. So we're looking at how many koalas are here, what tree species they're in, can the existing habitat support more koalas, and whenever it's possible, is there an opportunity to translocate koalas from the Southeast Queensland Wildlife Hospital network when those animals can't feasibly be returned to their original point of rescue. Also working out all of the regional ecosystems that are on the property. And this last one is an interesting project where we're looking at the bacteria in the feces of the koalas when they first arrive, and as they progress through, as they're eating the local leaf, because there is a belief, or there's a fair bit of evidence, that the bacteria that help the koala to digest the fibre in eucalyptus leaves is quite specific to particular regions and particular leaves. So there's a limit to how far you can safely move them, and that's why it's so important to put them back into an equivalent regional ecosystem to the one they came from. See, it's getting happier. So the work that's been done here by people, not me, Carmen and her team, we've now found more than 50 koalas on the property, 51 koalas. They've done more than 5,000 radio tracking events. Of the koalas on the property, there's more than 25, that's more than half with chlamydia, so that shows you how serious the problem is out here. There's been more than 400 vet exams, 400 and something, what did you say? It's all right, let's say 450. They've made 20 joeys in those 4 years, and there's been 16 deaths, so that's not very good. That shows you that there is probably going to be room for more koalas out here.
So, sorry, Rosie, were they wild koalas found?
Yes, that's the existing hidden vale habitat population. Sorry.
Sorry, the deaths, are they natural causes?
Carmen, there'd be a mix of things.
So there is a mix. There are some natural causes. There's some of mostly disease. There's one of a dog predation. A bit of a mix, but mostly disease.
But no hit by car, because you saw the road. So this is the radio tracking. Carmen, can you just say what this is also? It's beautiful.
Okay. So over our 4 years, we've had our monitored koalas radio tracked with VHF and GPS collars. What you're seeing here is GIS mapping of the GPS collars from a variety of animals. You'll see there's some clusters here. You'll see there's some that have done a trip that was actually a female. Each different colour is a different koala. We also have records of some going off the property. Any of you who followed that dirt road in today and didn't follow the main road, we had a couple, males scoot out towards Calvert that way, so that involves finding out a lot about our neighbours along the way, meeting every one of them, knocking on the door and saying, can we please track a koala? A lot of these, some of them we can recognise are quite small and quite clustered. There's our females with young, and then others are quite broad. You can see there are males, but that's just depicting on the property where our koalas are most located. It's mainly on this eastern side. We do have a hot spot down here. It's flatter land, a lot of more blue gum habitat. It gets hillier and then even more hillier as we go further west.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Thank you.
So I'm very impressed by this animal that has obviously found a really good place to live. She's not budging. So that's one of the hidden vale koalas being released after its vet exam into the tree that it was caught in. So just you can appreciate that there's some good connected forest in the background and some giant trees. It's good habitat. So how do we help them to hold on? Because everybody who's alive today can contribute to helping not only koalas but all of the wildlife that are suffering at our hands. So we need to do whatever we can to protect their remaining habitat. And a lot of that is involved in town planning and how the councils behave and making sure that we let the politicians who drive the country know what our priorities are. Because we do have a say, and we just demonstrated that recently. Yay! So it's also important to control the threatening processes. So chlamydia is obviously one of the major threatening processes. Car trauma is also the second most common, and that can be controlled by putting wildlife-proof fencing along roadsides and having culverts to allow animals to cross underneath, and we're getting better at building those. There's a lot of scientific research has gone into improving them. The 10% of koalas that come into the hospital are killed by dogs, usually domestic dogs. We can do better. We don't need huskies and pig dogs breeds as our pets in an urban environment. And if you saw what those dogs do to koalas, you would never own such a dog again unless you kept it entirely inside in a well-enriched environment. So please, control your dog, choose the breed wisely. Vote to show you care about the environment. I really think that that is one of the things that we can really do something to affect how things happen if we keep showing what our priorities are. And if you find a sick or injured koala, there are now a number of hospitals in the South East Queensland Wildlife Hospital Network. There's Currumbin for the Gold Coast. There's the RSPCA Wacol for the West. There's Moggle for another bit of the West, Moggle Koala Hospital. And there's Australia Zoo Wildlife Hospital on the Sunshine Coast. So, let's try and say something profound to finish with. I really think that if everybody concentrated on trying to make the world a better place by thinking of the environment in every single action that we take in our daily lives, that we might stop this trend, but we really have to focus on it. We've left our run very late. We've made a lot of mess since 1770 in a very beautiful country. That's not positive. I'm leaving it to the next speaker to change the mood. Questions at the end, yes? Or do we
actually say questions for the Q&A at the end?
Yep.
So we can get that.
Alrighty. That's me.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. That was wonderful. We will... So next up we have Rebecca Larkin. Rebecca is a vet who has a passion for wildlife and in particular... No?
Too many damn vets.
And in particular, threatened species. So she has done some work with breeding programs. I like this for bilbies. Forgive me if I say this wrong. Marley fowl and even cheetahs. Marley fowl and even cheetahs. So she retired over a decade ago and is now spending her time working at Ipswich Koala Protection Society, where she's responsible for a wonderful group of rescuers and carers, and she is a confessed koalaholic.
Yes, thank you, Erin, for that and for inviting me to come and speak today. And thanks everybody for coming. I think this is a fantastic thing for Ipswich to have right here. First of all, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land that we are having this meeting on, the Yagara people, the Yagara and the Yagarapool people, to pay respects to the elders, past, present and emerging, and also to acknowledge, leading on from what you said, Rosie, that fantastic management of 40, 60,000 years of people living here to create this wonderful biodiversity that we have to enjoy. How lucky we are. And to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land across which IKPS operates, which you'll see in a minute. But also, I guess, to acknowledge, hopefully in a less depressing way than that, but probably not, the terrible damage that we've done as white invaders since we've been here. So yes, let's move on to happy things. How do I change the thing? Press a button? Oh, there we go. So what I'm going to talk about in the 15 minutes that I have is who are IKPS, where we've come from, where we've been, and where we're going, hopefully where we want to go. So IKPS started as Woogaroo Protection Society. This is the hat. I don't know if anybody here knows Rick Natras, who was a ranger in national parks for a very long time. He was our first president, and with some other residents in the Woogaroo Creek area, they were very, very worried about this new state plan development that was going to happen there, and what was going to happen to all the plants and animals that lived there, and which is now actually called Springfield. So you can imagine that is a very old photo left there of Woogaroo Creek. This is a photo in the 90s where some developments already happened, and this is basically what it looks like now. Actually, it's probably going to be worse, very similar to your picture, Rosie. So we have some bush still. Out of sight down here is White Rock, if anybody knows that part of Ipswich, big connected area bush, and tiny little bits of connectivity. Hopefully there's a little bit of connectivity left down there, but we really have produced a hideously dangerous landscape for koalas to move across, what ones there are left. And yes, we have rescued a koala quite a few years ago now from Augustine Heights. No, we didn't put her back there. So that's where we came from. Very cleverly, the people involved decided that they probably weren't going to get much notice if they were the Eucalypt Woodland Habitat Protection Society. So they decided to use this amazing power of the koala, the iconic koala, to inspire and motivate and connect with people. So we're quite blatant about that. Yes, we are also obsessed with koalas, but we can give up any time. But it is something that I've seen time and time again. Humans seem to relate to koalas on an individual, emotional level. If you've ever been in a room with a whole load of Queensland Police Force, or when you'd have their photo taken with a baby koala, you'll see it in action. So this is us, the green. We evolved from that set of values that the Rita Trass's president established, which included protecting individual koalas as well as koala habitat, under the new presidency of Ruth Lewis, who was president for a very long time, more than 20 years, into a koala rescue and care group and a wildlife rescue and care group, and that is our area. It's still our area. The Moreton Bay, you can see that Rosie was talking about, is that the blue or the pink? The blue area, I think, probably. This is a very rough map, maybe the yellow. The green area is IKPS. Big, massive area. You know, we rescue koalas regularly that are more than an hour away from any sort of hospital. We traditionally started off taking our koalas to Moggle Koala Hospital that you can see there. We also had a clinic at Ruth's property. If you just take note of that little IKPS clinic, the position of it, I want you to remember that. Not because there's going to be a test later, but there's going to be a slide later. So yes, we evolved and we had a couple of hundred members, about 50 or more wildlife rescuers and carers, and 4 or 5, one time up to 6 specialised koala carers. In our 20th anniversary, we decided to do a little bit of an estimate of some numbers. We decided we'd focus on koala rescues only. As you can imagine, people are rescuing other things, and they're driving for their rescued koalas for other reasons than to rescue them, like feeding them, taking them to hospital. So just koala rescues, over that 20 years, we estimated the rescuers spent 7,300 days, or 175,200 hours driving and rescuing koalas. We tried to pull out a figure of how much that would cost if you had to employ somebody to do that, give them the specialised equipment, the special training, and the fuel, and we came up with 4,380,000 just on koala rescues over 20 years. That is a lot of money, as Rosie said, and theoretically our aim should be to be so successful that we are no longer needed. We don't need to rescue koalas anymore. What were they doing when they were doing all those rescues? 3,500 koalas were rescued approximately, 400,000 kilometres travelled, more than 200 orphans hand-raised for release back in the wild. Just to put that in context, that 3,500 koalas, the only study that I know of, there might be others, of the population of koalas in Ipswich was by Bill Ellis and one of his PhD students a few years ago. He estimated in the whole LGA there are between 2,000 and 4,000 koalas. Now, it's really hard to estimate numbers. That might be an underestimate, but that sort of gives you some perspective. One of the other things that we evolved into doing, which is a bit different to other care groups, is sharing our knowledge, learning from other groups, and training other groups. So this is a group, Fauna Rescue Whitsunday, which is based around the Mackay area up to Proserpine, Serena. when we went there, they weren't collecting records. And we said, hey, you need to collect records. So they started. This is Ian, who is responsible for their record collecting, and that's his map there, all those little koalas, sightings, dead koalas, coming into care. And because they did that, they started to be taken seriously by the local councils. And also, this is a meeting that we attended sometime later with the Main Roads Department up there when they were widening the Pacific Highway. So we consulted with them at their request, and we gave them a whole load of information, some of which was actually Main Roads information that they didn't know about, which was interesting. The widening happened, but they put in quite a lot of mitigation, and they actually reduced a whole load of mortalities on the Pacific Highway that have been killing koalas there. So, you know, that we thought that was a good win for records. Here's us talking, that's Ruth over there, talking to some wildlife rescuers in Gladstone, and here's me talking to some vets, and there's us playing with some very weird ground-dwelling koalas. This is our original mapping on an Access database. This is that report I was telling you about that quotes our mapping, and there's Ruth. Yes, she does bang on about records a lot. But this is something else that we managed to achieve out of keeping accurate records. That clinic that I mentioned, Ruth's place, is in the dotted line. This blue line is was the proposed line for the inland rail, if anyone lives out there and knows about the inland rail. This was in 2011. They were going to put it through there, and we said, hey, what about the koalas? They said, what koalas? There are no koalas. Our maps don't go out that far. There's no koalas. We said, we think there are. Here's some maps. Here's some sightings and records. They went away, scratched their heads, and thought, perhaps we better get some ecologists in here. And GHD report, of course, said, this is koala habitat. So they moved the 12 kilometres of the freight line, and now it's designated core koala habitat. They won't be developing it. So that's the power of records. We also work with researchers. These are two of our carers. On the left, there's Maureen, helping Sean Fitzgibbon put a collar, radio tracking collar on a koala that was rehabilitated, that was hit by a car at Cunningham, on the Cunningham Highway, near the raceway. This was a combined project. That's Tiffany from Queensland Trust for Nature, who have a property out there, releasing hitch on an Ipswich City Council nature refuge. They've tracked hitch and 20 kilometres home range, much bigger than further east. That's Trudy, one of our other rescuers, at a site we've got, a study site at Lake Wivenhoe, in a research project she's done. She's studied koalas there for about 8 years, tracking hand-raised orphans and comparing them to tracking mother-raised naturally orphans, which was very interesting. It's very interesting. What have we been doing lately? Well, we had a hideous year. I don't know whether anyone remembers the drought. Remember that? That went on for a very long time. It was basically 2 years, 2018, 2019. It was very hard on rescuers, and particularly koalas. We had lots and lots of mothers, milk drying up, abandoning their babies. You personally euthanized so many emaciated koalas. I just had enough by the end of it. I couldn't deal with it anymore. A lot of the orphans that we had in care, twice as many as we'd ever had before, had problems. I remember we sent one to you, Rosie. Developmental problems. I guess their mothers had always been starving. So we went from there to the fires. As Rosie said, we didn't actually get many koalas. We didn't get any koalas from the fires. They were all ash. If we found them. We had one post-fires who burnt her paws. What the amazing thing was that we got out of the fires was this incredible international and Australian fundraising response, which was handy because our ambulance, you saw photos of it earlier, we'd blown up the engine, embarrassingly. But yeah, this inspired us, this massive response that we got, to perhaps we do need to keep going. So we fired up again, and then COVID came. This is a display that we used to do. We haven't done any displays really since 2019. We used to take a koala out. We don't do that anymore. They're endangered now. And this state-funded trailer, we don't take out either. So what are we doing? We nearly collapsed. We nearly came to an end last year. We've been revamping ourselves, aligning our core goals, and establishing some core values which we didn't have. How are we going to treat each other and other people? We want to try and recruit new members. We're all old, retired people and getting older. I think everybody who runs a community or is in a community organisation has found COVID very difficult. Trying to get together, trying to connect, trying to maintain enthusiasm. It's sort of been a 2-year black hole. So we're trying to bring ourselves out of that. Recommitting to our wildlife carers, we've reduced some of the things we do. We no longer provide wildlife permits. That was a very onerous thing that we had to do legally, administratively, financially. We don't do that anymore. We have wildlife care members, but they get their own permits. We support them. We are trying to go back to our original goals, which was focusing on koala habitat. I really don't think personally there's any point in fixing up individual koalas if you're not fixing up the habitat. You're just, like Rosie said, we're wasting our money, but also we should be working to have koalas not be endangered. IKPS started when they were common. They're now endangered. We're clearly not doing things right, so we're trying to do things differently. And we want to engage with the community and get everybody knowing, as you said, Rosie, you actually were quite positive. Everybody, every day, can make decisions, how you spend your money, whether you go to the shops, in the car, all those sorts of things, and we can all make a difference. So I really believe that, and I've seen it, and there are lots of people out there that want to make a difference if we give them concrete things to do. What can they do? I think everybody can be galvanised. So that's where we're at working with the community. Yeah. Leaner and keener. Thank you.
All right, hi everyone, I'm Sharon Rundle-Teely and was caught up in traffic coming from the Gold Coast because I was teaching there today. So if you haven't met me, I'm a social marketer by background and am serving as your MC tonight. Now, Rebecca, thank you so much for a great presentation. I came in more than halfway through and heard some of the fantastic statistics and work that you've been doing. That's a lot of koalas and a lot of kilometres travelled. It's amazing. So thank you so much for presenting on your work. Now, I have great delight in introducing tonight Geoff Lundie-Jenkins. He works for the Department of Environment and Science on wildlife operations. He has an excellent high-level overview, and I'm sure not only for the first two speakers, but for Geoff, you may have questions. So at the break, which follows Geoff's presentation, please put your questions for those in the room on the card. For anyone who's actually watching online, can you please put that into the chat channel for us? So you can write them down, hand them to members of our team, and we'll be fielding all of those questions at the end of the evening. So with no further ado, I'll hand this to Geoff.
Thanks, Sharon, and thanks everyone again for spending time tonight. It's really encouraging to get this many people in a room to talk around koalas and koala protection. And I think, as both Rosie and Rebecca have demonstrated, there's a real need to get people interested and aligned in trying to address the things that are threatening our koala populations. As Sharon said, I'm a director within Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service. My responsibilities are wildlife operations, but I also am, I think, the only person in the state that has the word koala in their title, so I'm also the Director of Koala Operations, which involves supervising a number of teams within QPWS with specific responsibilities related to koalas. I think both Rosie and Rebecca have done a really good job in setting the scene, but what I'll sort of talk through is some of the key things that have led the Queensland Government, I guess, to design and rethink the way in which they approach koala conservation and the need to undertake action. So in 2015, University of Queensland researchers, using data that had been collected by the Queensland Government, reviewed koala populations in southeast Queensland, and there was some really strong data that had been collected both in the Pine Rivers area and in the Koala Coast areas to indicate that there had been ongoing declines in koala populations in those areas, despite the fact that there'd been over 10 years of concerted conservation effort So the indication was that what we were doing then wasn't being effective, and I think again both Rosie and Rebecca have reinforced that pretty strongly. That led the Queensland Government then to appoint a koala expert panel, and they were charged with reviewing both that data but also reviewing the programs that had been in place and coming up with some recommendations for government to say, what do you need to do differently? What do we need to change that trajectory? So that koala expert panel generated a report which made some really specific recommendations about the need for significant change with regards to the planning framework, with regards to the protections for koala habitat, with regards to addressing the key threats to koala populations, with regards to actually having effective frameworks and partnerships in place, because it was clear that the Queensland Government couldn't do this on their own, that they really rely on partnerships to be effective in this space. The Queensland Government accepted all the recommendations of that expert panel report, and a key recommendation of that was to develop a koala conservation strategy and to develop some new protections for koala habitat. So the response by the Queensland Government was to generate and put in place some new protections in the planning framework to protect koala habitat, and they were introduced in February in 2020, and then to also develop a coordinated SEQ koala conservation strategy which was released in August 2020. Both of those involved significant consultation, particularly in relation to the koala conservation strategy, and it was very strongly informed by community input and peak body input to generate that strategy. The framework in terms of changing the planning protections, there was specific new legislation introduced, and that changed elements of the planning regulation, the Nature Conservation Act and the Nature Conservation Plan for koalas, and the environmental offsets regulations. It also had implications with regards to changes to the vegetation management regulation. So this was quite a significant legislative reform to change the way in which koala habitat was both mapped and recognised and protected in southeast Queensland. This is just a quick snapshot of the new mapping that underpins that new planning framework, and this is a snapshot I hope that people can recognise in this landscape from the Ipswich local government area. The green areas represent core koala habitat. The yellow areas represent areas that have been mapped as koala habitat restoration areas. So they were areas that were identified from pre-clearing data that had previously supported habitat that was suitable for koalas. So again, it's identified as potentially areas for future investment in rehabilitation. The cross-hatching in parts of the map indicate areas that are defined as what we call koala priority areas. And there was a deliberate intent to identify and group areas of large contiguous habitat to identify koala priority areas. And they were a key recommendation of the expert panel as areas that were sufficiently large and had sufficient habitat that they would provide the best investment in terms of trying to secure the long-term protection of koala populations. The planning controls that are in place mean that clearing of koala habitat areas within a koala priority area is prohibited. So really strong protections in those areas. There are some exemptions, as tends to be the case with all government regulation, but primarily in those koala priority areas, the options for large-scale subdivision and development of land in those landscapes is now controlled through those new arrangements. In the areas outside the koala priority areas, those other areas of koala habitat are now subject to significant assessment, and any developments must meet the requirements of a new state planning code. So again, a stronger level of protection for that other remnant habitat outside those priority areas. So as I said, the koala conservation strategy was introduced in August in 2020. That strategy outlines how we would respond to those key 6 recommendations that were in the expert panel report. And it also looks at how we focus the efforts into the areas where we have that highest likelihood of success. And that's where that koala habitat mapping and that mapping of koala priority areas becomes so important, because it identifies those large contiguous areas of koala habitat that support koala populations, where we have the best chance that if we invest in habitat protection, habitat restoration, managing threats and trying to mitigate threats to koala populations, that we can potentially have the best success in both securing those populations and reversing those trends that both Rosie and Rebecca reflected in their presentations. Again, through the input from the community, the strategy actually set some very ambitious targets. And they were targets that when the consultation finished, the Queensland Government, I think, groaned over, because they sort of went, we probably weren't confident to necessarily aim so hard. So the targets are that the populations would stabilise in numbers in South East Queensland over the life of the strategy. So the idea is that we're committing to see no further reduction in populations in the life of the strategy. That koala habitat, there would actually be a net gain in total core koala habitat in the life of the strategy. So again, we're looking at a 5-year strategy and set a benchmark around actually increasing the area of core habitat. There's a commitment towards habitat restoration to actually commence rehabilitation to restore 10,000 hectares of koala habitat. And again, that's a massive stretch to try and achieve that type of target. And then in terms of threat reduction, we're looking at commencing 10 programs in threat priority areas to support at least a 25% reduction in disease, injury and mortality rates in those locations. So this year we're going to be working through a process with the local governments to identify and establish the basis for those projects and to allocate funding to those projects. The focus areas within the strategy, the 6 focus areas, is around habitat protection, habitat restoration for koalas, threat management, improved mapping, monitoring, research and reporting, because again, in order to be able to measure the success of any measures that we do in other areas, we need to be able to have accurate read on what the population is doing, what's happening with koala habitat, what's happening with regards to those mortality factors that are impacting on koala populations. Community engagement is a really critical component of the strategy, because I think, again, as Rosie and Rebecca both reflected, that empowering the community and getting the community to buy in and contribute to these programs is critical to their success, as is influencing the governments and the developers and the other people in the community that have a stake in protecting or disturbing koala habitat. So it's a really important part. And then partnerships and strategic coordination. As I said, it's clearly recognised the Queensland Government can't do this on its own. And there's a need to have really strategic partnerships with local government, with people who have resources and funding and have a will to invest in things environmental and the protection of iconic natural species like koalas, and the ability to leverage investment. So the Queensland Government's willing to invest in these programs. We want to leverage additional investment from other groups. This is an awful slide, and I think I've got 6 of these in a row, but it's only when I saw it on the screen I went, that's awful. So I'll actually rush through these. But these 6 areas have a range of actions. In the habitat protection space, we've ticked off 2 of those. So we now have state-of-the-art koala habitat mapping, and we've got these strong new protections in place to start trying to reverse or control that trend in habitat loss. In the habitat restoration space, there's a really significant commitment to increase our investment in koala habitat restoration, and there's funds allocated. We have a $4.6 million partnership with the Queensland Trust for Nature to do habitat restoration, and in the most recent budget announcement there's over $9 million to spend in the next 4 years specifically on koala habitat restoration. In terms of threat management, the project that this forum and some of the work that Sharon and her team have been doing is part of our approach to threat management, but also to community engagement. So Sharon and the team have been working with local governments to co-design some approaches to community engagement and threat mitigation actions at the community level. This year we will be identifying those threat hotspots and setting up projects to implement threat management. There's ongoing work in the space of mapping, monitoring and research. This year we'll also fund invest another $1 million in funding into applied research grants to support research to improve our knowledge around koalas. As I said, there's a significant piece in the community engagement space. Last year some of you would have seen us host the Koala Collab and hopefully saw the information that was presented and the breadth of work, both research work but also direct conservation programs that are being implemented to support koala conservation. And as I've said before, there's a whole raft of actions around partnerships and strategic coordination that's really important. We're about to announce some appointments to a koala technical advisory group that will help inform some of those programs as we move forward. We just released an annual report. In that annual report, the key highlights were that we've increased the area and level of protection of koala habitat, so through those new planning things. Through the initial phases of our koala habitat restoration stuff, we've planted over 90,000 trees to restore over 100 hectares of koala habitat. We've got state-of-the-art habitat mapping. We've invested since 2017, we've invested $10.8 million in the SEQ Wildlife Hospital network to improve our work in rehabilitation, but also to support research into vaccines for chlamydia. As I said, $4.48 million to expand the Koala Habitat Restoration Partnerships program. We hosted the CoLab, and this project that we've been doing with Griffith that we are now extending into a second year has been looking particularly at community engagement, but around also threat mitigation initiatives. You would have all heard the Premier and our Minister announce $24.6 million of new funding. So in the next 4 years, we will be again accelerating our investment in koala conservation efforts, and that will further expand the habitat restoration programs. We'll have that targeted programs to address threats. We'll have specific funding to address research gaps and knowledge gaps. We've been working with First Nations group to develop a First Nations koala action plan, and we've got funding to help implement the first stages of that. And some of that is around sharing information and knowledge, but also about getting direct engagement in programs. Community awareness, further investment to increase the SEQ Wildlife Hospital network. We're developing and refining further tools to do with their mapping and assessment of koala habitat. And we're also going to be expanding the new koala habitat mapping to cover the SEQ bioregion, because currently it just covers that planning region. So this sort of just summarises, I think, we recognise the severity of the problem that is faced by koalas, but I think through that expert knowledge and the community input, we now have a strategy that we're confident if we can invest in that and attract other investment that will actually make significant differences to the status and the trajectory of our koala populations. So thanks.
All right, everyone, welcome back. So with no further ado, I'm going to let Erin talk about some of the work that she's been doing, and I'll hand straight over to you, Erin Hurley. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Erin Hurley, and I am a project officer on the Southeast Queensland Cross-Coordination Koala Conservation Project. Quite a mouthful, that one. I am one part of a team at Social Marketing at Griffith, and this project is funded by DES. We did hear a little bit of Geoff talking about, what our work is around. We have the focus on the community engagement and threat mitigation initiatives that we're co-designing with community to implement across Southeast Queensland and in partnership with local governments. So today, as Sharon mentioned, I'm going to talk about some of the things that we have been doing in community to date. So we're kicked off our year 2 of the project. So why are we doing this? Because we want to reduce the number of koala deaths across southeast Queensland. What are we doing? We want to increase knowledge. We want to change attitudes, and ultimately what we want to be doing is changing behaviours. You know, we want, in particular as well, a focus on actions that individuals can take in community to support koala conservation. You know, looking at things like decreasing driving speed. Again, our project has a focus as well on decreasing koala deaths from dogs. You know, so some behaviours we're looking at are dog behaviours as well, improving dog abilities, improving the number of dog trainers that are actually trained in wildlife avoidance. You know, so we're seeing this in community.
How come land clearance isn't there?
Pardon?
How come land clearance is there?
Our particular focus is on community engagement and threat mitigation. Yeah. So how are we doing this? At Social Marketing at Griffith, we have this CBE process, which I'm not going to talk about, but essentially we co-create with community. So we work with stakeholders, we work with residents, you know, we do research, we understand the context, the problems, and try and identify the best solution moving forward. We then build programs, events, initiatives, activities, and we implement these in community through a range of channels and platforms, which I will talk about shortly. And who are we doing it for? Councils across southeast Queensland. So some of the research that we've conducted with this project at the start, before we kicked it off, actually he's here in the room, Aaron at the back there did an evidence review to have a look at what is currently being implemented in councils across southeast Queensland. We've had workshops and meetings with stakeholders, councillors, wildlife organisations, community members, really to understand the context, to understand the problem. You know, we're working across southeast Queensland and the regions have different issues going on, so we want to make sure we kind of understanding the local context. We have co-designed with community members, so we worked with community members to develop our koala awareness campaign materials. We also worked with dog owners to understand how we can best engage them in initiatives where we're working with improving dog abilities. An evaluation is part of this. We implemented a baseline survey last year. We've since done a follow-up survey this year. The baseline survey, I mean, those online could perhaps scan the QR code, but we will send the slides out to everyone following this. It's actually online on a dashboard where you can view the results. So you can view the results for the whole of southeast Queensland, but you can also view the results for each individual LGA. So this here is just some of the snapshot of what we have for Ipswich. You know, this is really important and helps us to identify areas where perhaps, you know, behaviours we want to target in a particular region because they might be lacking a little bit. You know, we can see here low numbers on how to identify a sick koala or knowing how to report koala sightings. So this is messaging that we can be putting in community. So we have, as I mentioned, developed a koala awareness campaign. This was in consultation with community, also based on past experience. We have worked with Griffith Film School to produce 2 videos. The first one actually has gone around the world, winning a few awards, which is fantastic. It just highlights little actions that people can take in community to support koalas. So this is an example of one council that we've worked with to deliver our koala awareness campaign. We actually worked with Logan City Council. They took, as you can see here, our branding and adapted it to their branding. You know, it's very similar. There's some tweaks there, but you can see it's kept the consistent messaging, but it's with the Logan branding guidelines. They took the campaign messages, put it under different themes. You know, we got breeding season, dogs, swimming pools, identifying a sick and injured koala. So the objectives of this campaign was to decrease the number of wildlife strikes, koalas being hit by cars, you know, increasing awareness around koalas' movement during breeding season on the roads, as well as increasing the number of wildlife sightings. So the number of koala sightings reported to council, as well as the number of sick and injured wildlife for koalas reported to RSPCA. Here's just a couple examples of some of the campaign materials that they use. They put magnets on the side of their council cars. They use social media. Got really creative with this glove box checklist. You know, if you're out and about driving and you do hit wildlife or you see something injured on the side of the road, you need that information then and there. How do you know who to call or how do you know what to do? So having that in the glove box at the time that you need it is really handy. Okay, so when comparing the previous season's breeding season with the one when the campaign was implemented, we had over 150% increase in the number of koala sightings to Logan City Council and RSPCA. And we had an over 80% decrease in the number of koalas that were admitted into care due to vehicle strike, which was fantastic. Okay, so moving on from that, we also, as part of our koala awareness campaigning, have the Wildlife Watcher socials, so Facebook and Instagram. You know, if you don't already follow this, I urge you to jump on, you know, have a search of, it's called Wildlife Watcher. If you love koalas, and I mean, if you're here today and tuning in online, I'd say you love koalas. You really want to follow this page. We share wonderful stories about what's going on with koalas in community. We had this video go viral recently with over 33,000 likes of a koala crossing actually the road at Griffith University with a little baby on its back. So with this socials that we have, we actually get a lot of community support. So we've had someone ask how they can adopt this adorable little Joey that Brooklyn posted about. We get people asking how they can volunteer. We get donations, you know, not even just cash donations, but here is one with these pouches where people could write in and they could get a template sent to them, create their own little pouch at home and then send that to their local wildlife organisation. You know, they put the joeys in these pouches when they come in. The community engagement aspect of it, we do go out in community with a Wildlife Watcher store. This one's really family focused. Really focused on educating families on different actions that they can take in their household and neighbourhood to support koalas. So we have, you know, a checklist that they can put on their fridge. We've got this backdrop that kids can go up to and they can spot all of the different ways that koalas are being helped in that picture. They then get, if you see this tree here, they can write their own ideas down and stick it up. This is something, you know, if you want to take action, jump on, again, we'll pass these out. There's a QR code in the link there, but we have free resources so you can jump online and you can download the campaign collateral that we have. You can post one of these on social media, you know, print one of these posters off, laminate it, put it in your local park or your local community centre, just something that we can all do to start getting some messaging out there. Okay, so as I mentioned, we also focus on dogs. So the Leave It program has been running since 2017. It's focused on improving dogs' abilities, wildlife avoidance training for dogs, as well as keeping dogs inside at night. So encouraging and improving awareness around the fact that, you know, dogs should be denned or kept inside at night. So we have a website for this, which has lots of free resources. A monthly e-news as well, if you like. It's called leaveit.com.au. Again, we have social medias for this, Furry Friends, Facebook and Instagram, just celebrates dog owners. You know, it provides fun things as well as behavioural and health advice for pets as well. So as part of the Leave It program, again, we go out in communities with the Leave It stall. We've worked with Moreton Bay Regional Council, for example, with their Pets in Public Spaces events where they're promoting responsible pet ownership. So as part of this event, we go there and hand out some free resources. But what we'll also be doing as we work with this event in the future this year is linking with local local dog owners who we will get accredited in wildlife avoidance, so Leave It accreditation. then community will be able to come along and participate in a free half-an-hour workshop with their dogs to learn some wildlife avoidance training. You know, what we want to do is be training local dog trainers in wildlife avoidance. So when people, you know, are getting their dogs trained in sit, stay, come, they're also learning wildlife avoidance. It's just one of those behaviours that are taught. You know, people told us when we did the co-design session, yes, they love something where they can come face-to-face and get the support, but they want online as well. So we also run some free online workshops, really short little things that are on the Furry Friends page. We have one coming up on Monday if you're interested. How to use positive interrupters. So I guess we'll have a dog trainer explaining what that means, but basically, you know, how you can stop some negative behaviours in your dog. You know, barking at the mailman, jumping up on the couch, for example. This is a fantastic one that we have. The Leave It app is just being developed at the moment or in the final stage of development. It will be released at the end of the month or start of September. But what this one is, it's focused on not only wildlife avoidance, but other behaviours as well. You know, if your dog can't sit, stay, come, what are the chances that you're going to get it to stop chasing wildlife? So this app just has short little videos that work you through training your dog on different behaviours. It's even got this cool little clicker here, you know, the noise that you need when you're training your dog. If you're interested in this one, you can register at the Leave It website to be notified when it goes live on the App Store. And finally, we have Dog Fest. This one is a free community festival. You know, how do you get dog owners in one place? You throw an amazing festival for them. So we actually hosted one in Ipswich earlier this year. We had nearly 2,000 people attend, around 600 dogs. You know, we get people there with some fun. We have competitions, activities, Smooch the Pooch, which is hugely popular. And then we throw in the education as well. So we connect dog owners with local dog experts. We have them there with stalls. You know, we have dog trainers giving demonstrations and workshops. We try and make it interactive and engaging so they can bring their dog and they can participate. We have the wildlife avoidance training there as well, of course. So, you know, there was a lot more that we're up to and a lot more that we are going to be doing as we go into year 2 of our project that I'd love to talk about, but couldn't because of time. So if you do want to stay up to date with what we're doing, you can sign up for our Koala Spotlight e-news, where once a month we just send a little update about some of the activities we've been up to in the project. Thank you.
Now, I would like to actually hand over to Belinda, who would like to, she's a team leader who works across catchment issues and does a lot of planning work around ecosystems and what she can actually do from a council perspective to help. So I'll let her share her team's work and what they do.
Thanks for having me tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Council's been doing over the past 5 years in the koala management space and also where we're going forwards for that. So in 2018, Council delivered Koala Conservation Management Plan. The vision of that plan was looking at protecting, enhancing, managing and increasing our local koala populations, but also our koala habitat in Ipswich. It set out a series of objectives which centred around the amount and connectivity of koala habitat, protecting and improving habitat values, enhancing and protecting key habitat corridors, understanding, identifying and reducing major threats, increasing community engagement and directing suitable mitigation measures. So the Koala Management Plan identified different koala management areas. So there was 4 different types. This was developed using data from council surveys, data from the Ipswich Koala Protection Society and Queensland Government data with good collaboration. So there's 4 different types of koala management areas. The first one's urban consolidated areas. There's one of those just here. So these have the potential to provide long-term refuges for koalas despite being in urban environments. The next one is the core habitat areas, which you can see are in the red here. These are centred predominantly around existing koala populations, but also the council natural area estate. The third type are the blue ones. These are priority rehabilitation areas. They're typically fragmented areas of habitat in rural areas, but they do support koala populations. They're on predominantly private properties, so they're ideal for conservation partnerships. The fourth type is impact mitigation areas. So these are areas of Ipswich which have undergone development or earmarked for future development, so require a bit of different treatment. So a series of management actions have been developed for all of these koala management areas. Different actions established for each specific type of management area depending on its needs and the koala's needs in that area, but they're broadly categorised around the data on the koalas, the habitat management side of things, the community education and incentivisation, and also the threat management. So these are just a couple of examples of excerpts. The top one is from the urban consolidation area. The bottom one is from the core habitat areas which are associated with natural state. You'll see that's White Rock and Flinders Gulman there, for example. So you can see they're quite specific to each of those management areas. Now, some examples of things that we've delivered on the ground in the past 5 years. This is at White Rock Conservation Estate. Two key pieces of work. The first one was lantana removal with follow-up treatments, and then revegetation in conjunction with also pest animal management, quite intense. So the outcomes were quite good for the koalas, but also from a broader ecosystem benefits as well. So removing the lantana from around the eucalyptus trees improved the accessibility for the koalas. It's also provided a safer space for release of koalas as well. From a broader perspective, it's allowing native regeneration of locally significant species and also easier movement of other species such as our eastern greys. Similar work being done at Mount Grantchester with lantana removal and follow-up spray treatments. Again, we've got improved accessibility and they're seeing native regeneration happening as well. Council runs a series of community-based programs, so every property in Ipswich can access the free plant program, 6 plants per property, but lots more are available for properties which are larger in rural areas or if they've signed up to one of our conservation partnerships. Conservation partnerships, there's 6 different types, including a koala conservation partnership for landholders who've got more than 1 hectare of land or have land that's suitable for restoration for koala habitat. Council also delivers an annual Habitat Connections program. So this is a strategic creek rehabilitation program designed to restore degraded waterways. Members of the community are invited to get involved in these plantings in particular. We've done projects in Bundamba Creek, Iron Pot Creek and 6 Mile Creek. One of the key species for these restorations is the blue gum, which again provides the habitat but also helps with the movement of species as well. Council's also delivered a series of information guides around land management and also threat management. These are all available on the council website. The Koala Management Plan also sets out a monitoring schedule so we can look at the overall trends of our koala populations over the life of the plan. In 2020, a survey was done by BioLink. We're looking at the numbers and locations of our koalas, how the populations are faring, how does it fit in with historical trends, and are the conservation activities actually making a difference. Results-wise, there was a bit of bad news. The area of occupancy had a 25% decrease, but this was reflected in the growth and development in part of the city. But on the good news front, there were signs of strong generational persistence and great connected generation persistence areas. It identified a series of challenges, including more urban development, one of the fastest growing areas in Australia, roadkill, inland rail, although we could try and see that as an opportunity, and also fire management. So where are we up to? So QPWS is currently undertaking surveys for koalas. They're doing this on state land, council land and private land as well. We are waiting on the results of that, but this is some preliminary data that's come through. They're actually looking to create a long-term monitoring program, which they will visit these sites every 2 years. So it'd be good to get this data in place. From a corridor perspective, this is a map out of Council's 2015 Nature Conservation Strategy. The corridors are focusing on local connectivity and focal points for rehabilitation projects, and also dealing with fragmentation of habitat as well. They also provide linkages outside of the Ipswich local government area, so connecting in with other local government areas. So the key ones here, we've got the Little Liverpool Range, which Shania will talk about shortly, the Flinders-Karawatha Corridor, and the Dagular Range National Park to the north. Council's also now developing a new natural environment strategy. One of the strategic outcomes of that strategy will be biodiversity and threatened species recovery. So natural habitat areas which have significant values, such as habitat for koalas, have been identified as part of this strategy development. Another objective is protecting and connecting natural habitat areas. So new habitat corridor mapping is being developed in conjunction with the development of the new strategy. So what's next? We're getting more data. We have a refreshed strategic direction for the environment for Council. We've got the learnings over the past 5 years of the implementation of the Koala Management Plan. I have a new biodiversity officer starting on board in September. I've actually pinched him from here, sorry, not sorry. And we have ongoing collaborations with our existing community members and also looking for new opportunities. So we will be looking at a fresh approach. The plan's now expired later this year. So yeah, we're really excited we can't do this on our own, so we're looking forward to actually getting people together to set that new direction for koala management in Ipswich. Thank you.
Now, I would like to hand over to Shania, but I probably am not saying it correctly. Shania's been working for Ipswich City Council across a number of koala projects for quite some time, and she's going to talk to you about the Little Liverpool project.
I'm Shania Watson from Ipswich City Council. I've been involved with this program for almost 2 years now, and I actually came from here, which is very exciting. Poached from here as well. So has anyone heard of the Little Liverpool Range initiative before? Yeah, a few people. A few of our landholders are here. Hi, Bob and Judy. So before I delve into what we're doing with our koalas, I will provide a little bit of background on what is the Little Liverpool Range initiative and our overall aims. So does anyone know where the Little Liverpool Range is? Hopefully, most people. Yeah. So we're actually standing on the Little Liverpool Range. So the Little Liverpool Range actually acts as a really important corridor which connects right down to Main Range National Park and almost reaches Diagula. So we want to work on this area to expand this corridor and create overall better habitat for not just our koalas but all species. Across the corridor, we're very lucky to have a number of rare and threatened species. You can see a few up there: koalas, brush-tailed rock wallabies, glossy black cockatoos, powerful owls, black-breasted button quail, just to name a few. So it really shows the value of this corridor, and it will, into the future, act as an important climate change refugia, as a lot of this area probably won't be developed just because of terrain and habitat, and obviously this corridor will be prioritised, particularly with councils into the future. We also have a number of threatened regional ecosystems, so semi-evergreen vine thicket, Eucalyptus teraticornis on alluvial soils, as well as your Melaleuca urbiana forests. So there are 3 of our main regional ecosystems that we want to look at regenerating and supporting people in regenerating. So who are we? I'm based out of Ipswich City Council, but we actually have 3 funding partners. So Ipswich City Council, Turner Family Foundation, who is one of the hosts of tonight, as well as the Queensland Trust for Nature. So across this corridor, each of the funding partners actually has a really good chunk of land that's being protected protected by overall conservation. So our goal is to engage with private landholders and create a better corridor. And a lot of this is through our partnerships program with council. So we already have a really good established community engagement. Our other partners, so the other three, I should say, regional councils in the area. So Scenic Rim, Somerset, Lockyer Valley Council. We work really closely with these guys, particularly the Lockyer Valley, as they do take up a big portion of the other side of the range. And then we also work with Healthy Land and Water, as well as the University of Southern Queensland. So that makes up our working group as such. So we come together on a fairly regular basis, and we talk about collaboration, projects that are happening in the range, and potential future projects, so whether we want to apply for grants. And that creates a really good basis of collaboration and coordinated management across the Little Liverpool Range. So all of our activities are governed by our strategic plan. We have 5 main strategic aims. So the first being to protect existing habitat across the range, and this is mostly done through our conservation partnerships as well as Land for Wildlife. So the councils in the area either have the agreements or Land for Wildlife, and through those programs the landholders have access to a number of resources, support from ecologists. So overall being able to have better access resources and understanding of what they can do to help the habitat and animals. Our second aim is to promote the stewardship of their land. So using education as a tool to create value in our community members of the Little Liverpool Range and everything that wildlife has to offer. We also look at developing coordinated management of pest species, and as I said before, valuing assets really creates that stewardship in our community. I'm not going to touch on that. That's a hot topic. So our third strategic aim is to also restore degraded habitat. So looking at our regional ecosystems that do need further support, like your Melaleuca urbiana forests, as well as Eucalyptus terraticornis, which is good koala habitat. Our fourth aim is to support our locally rare and threatened species. So I named a fair few before, and to do this we run a lot of educational workshops, as well as trying to increase our documentation of species across the range. At this stage we kind of have a few points here and there of, oh, we have these species here, what about here? And there's a lot of areas where we don't really know what we have, and this is mostly on private land because a lot of people haven't in the past had an opportunity to document species. And so I think this is a really great tool to get more records, and like we said before, without records we can't do effective management. So it's a very exciting space. And then our fifth aim is to increase the overall awareness of the cultural and ecological significance of the Little Liverpool Range. So as I touched on before, what do? We run a heap of educational workshops. We actually have a resource library that we loan to our members. So we have camera traps, audio moths, all of which we've used in the past to identify koalas across the range, as well as other species. You never know what you're going to get, and it's really cool to go through those types of things. And then we have a few conservation projects. So previously we've had some koala detection dogs deployed across the range, as well as looking at long-term nest box monitoring projects. So that's coming up. One really awesome thing we do is we have Little Liverpool afternoon teas for our community members to come together, share their problems, their successes, and just create a overall better community across the Little Liverpool Range, where they know that there's other people who value the habitat and doing what they can to support species. So currently, this is the koala records across the Little Liverpool Range. So as you can see, they're all the way across the range. However, a lot of this data it's fairly old, so we don't really know at this stage where our koalas are now, what are their major threats. So they're all things that we're going to look at into the future, because without current data, we can't really manage them effectively. So, as I mentioned, we want to create an understanding of koala presence distribution, what are their threats. We're creating a network of private landholders who are actively managing their properties for koalas and overall wildlife conservation. Continue to run educational workshops. We actually recently had a koala workshop. So we'll continue to partner with organisations to deliver on-ground results. So a number of our working group partners have been currently doing a lot of habitat restoration across the range. And the Little Liverpool Range and councils kind of act as that connection between groups, natural resource management groups, and our private landholders. And we'll continue to apply for grants in conjunction with other Little Liverpool partners. So what's the future for the koalas in the range, and how can the community get involved? We want to look out into the future looking at genetic and health status research. As I mentioned before, there's a lack of data in this area, so we don't really know how to manage our koalas effectively. We'll continue to partner with organisations to deliver on-ground habitat restoration. We'll continue to increase our resource library, so our camera traps and audio moths, and continue to process that data and log our documentation. And finally, our iNaturalist platform. So I don't know if people have heard of iNaturalist, but it's a great way to get records onto Atlas of Living Australia and WildNet. So we'll encourage our community members to do that. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really great to hear about all of your work. Now, our final speaker, it's not a last but not least kind of thing. I was very excited when I first met Carney. We both work at the same university, and he'd heard a little bit about the work we do and reached out. And are any of you, have you ever gone onto Ancestry DNA to look up who you're related to and where you've actually come from? Yeah, have some fun listening to Carney's work, because this is what he does for koalas. I'll hand over to you.
Yeah. Haha, okay. Oh, there we go. Oh, back. Gone one too far. Okay, so this started out with an interesting question. And the question was essentially posed to me by a teacher. And the teacher said, well, what can we do to learn more about koalas? In fact, can we DNA type the koalas? Of course we can. There are teams all over Australia DNA typing them and doing whole genomes and all types of fantastic research. But the question was not, can we get the whole genome? Can we understand the chlamydia load? All these great questions that other presenters have presented to you tonight about concerns and threats and so forth. The question that we were asked was, can we get more information, more smaller detailed information? We saw in Rosemary's presentation with Carmen's support, the movement and the tracking of koalas, which is brilliant. And we saw in Shania's the presentation where you spot the koalas and list them on iNaturalist, which is also great. But what we wanted to do, and what the people who talked to us about wanted to do, was let's get genetic information where we don't have to disturb the koalas, we don't have to impact them or give them stress. And that was, of course, their scats. And so the question then said, well, can we get DNA from the scats? Yes, we can. What type of information can we get from their scats? And I said, well, what information do you want? And the University of Sunshine Coast is doing brilliant work on chlamydia and genetic health and genetic testing on koala scats. But the question we had was, can we identify the individual koala? Can we place on Shania's map which dot is Koala Bob or Koala Joan or Koala Freddie, right? Can we get that information? I said, yes, absolutely we can. So we apply forensic DNA typing. This is DNA typing that will allow us to identify an individual koala or an individual person. And not only can we do that, but we'll be able to look at relationships between the koalas. So even if the koala is not even present in the area, we'll be able to get his DNA profile because his children will be there. right? And we can use paternity testing and reverse paternity testing. So the question was posed by Education Queensland, at least some teachers first. So we started a project to build the DNA profiling system, again more forensic rather than the genetic testing that's being done today. And we wanted to introduce to schools. So we have school groups now come to Griffith University, walk around Toohey Forest, spot the koalas, don't disturb them, collect their scats, go into the laboratory, extract the DNA and DNA profile the koalas. Now, we use a variety of different DNA profiling systems, which means it's consistent with some of the existing data. But essentially, I want to show how we do it. So, first of all, we're looking at their scats, right? Now, with their scats, of course, that's a little less invasive. Most certainly, I think, information rich, right? We heard about the microbiomes from the scats. We can look at the chlamydia load from the scats. We can get their diet from the scats, and of course, we can get their DNA. So from the information that we're able to generate, we're actually able to reconstruct their family trees. So a lot of people are quite interested in your own family tree and your own family history. Well, now this is the koalas family tree and the koalas family history. And particularly with some of the partners that we have and some of the contributors that we have so far, they've asked, well, what does this do for me? And I said, well, if you send in your scats, I'll be able to DNA type them for you, and that will give you a DNA fingerprint of that koala. You send in more scats, and I can tell you if they're related to that first koala. You send in as many scats as you can find, and we'll be able to identify the entire genetic population on your property or in your interest area, and the relationship between them, cousin Bertie, cousin Joan. And then we can identify the fathers, the mothers, how many children they're having, what is their fertility, what is their fecundity, right? How many children do they normally have? You could also look at their mortality if you want to show them exiting the population. Even when you can't spot the male koalas, but you get a child that has a DNA profile that matches from a descendant from that father, you're able to say the father's still alive because he's still reproducing, right? Because you've got so you've got invisible count as well. So even if we don't get the father, we can still connect them all together. So the first question is, how do we start this? Well, we started as a program. It's a citizen science program. This is not a research project. We're not doing this for a whole range of data. It's going to take us years to collect data to actually make something useful for it. But the aim is to open this up to the public so that the public can actually play a part in it. They can get the koala scat, get the information, and keep looking for more family members and keep looking for relationships. We send them back a report, and the report will give them the information about their koala and the relationships as that information builds in our databases. So you could, in the future, use this to help identify where the koalas are, to complement the current survey strategies, to complement the radio tagging strategies. So identify where in the area, and I apologise, this is Toohey Forest area, so where in the area would you actually be able to find the koala, and look at the distributions of the koalas across the landscape. And unlike some research projects where they go out, identify the koalas and come back and DNA type the 30 koalas they found, with the scats being collected, and particularly the ones in the Toohey Forest where we're starting with the school groups, we're going to be DNA testing the same koala over and over and over again. And that's okay, because that will help us to identify its distribution, its movement patterns, right? It might identify large movements over large landscapes, right? We'll be able to use the information to look at different genetic populations. And so we'll be able to say, yes, we've got the Toohey group, we've got the Mount Gravatt group, and so forth. So the data can be used for more than just genetic family trees, right? And looking at genetic health as well. We can also identify where that little pesky male is going, right? Where is he moving from Toohey into Mount Gravatt, or any area around southeast Queensland? Where is it moving to, and where is it moving from? Even if we don't see him, we're going to see the DNA in the offspring. And so we are to look at the range that male koalas may pick up, which I think is...
Are male koalas rarer?
Sorry?
Are the male koalas rarer?
Absolutely not. They move more.
Oh.
Yeah. So the females usually will find range, but I think Carmen, didn't you show a female moving? Yeah, so see, that's really exciting, right? Because if we can, but you had also a female that was really tight. So that type of information, we really hope to complement stuff that you've already done. And that's why I said your work was so awesome in terms of tracking that information. It really is exceptional. But males are the ones that usually travel a bit further. So, and also, so here's an example of the female distribution. So by testing it again and again and again, and because we have, the way that we test it, we'll be taking advantage of some of the high school students, some of the undergraduate students at universities, some staff and researchers like myself. But because we're testing them more than once, it might fail one time, but the next time we might get it. And we might get it 10 more times, 20 more times. So because of redundancy and the ease of collecting the scats, we're going to be able to put this puzzle pieces together a lot more quickly. And especially when we've got people out collecting scats all the time. I mean, when I go through Toohey Forest, I almost collect them every day. I see koalas every day and I collect the scats, and people see me collecting bags of 20 or so scats and they look at me a bit weirdly, you know. But we have the school groups come out, and every time we've gone out, I've seen koalas for them, and a number of them. Oh, excellent, look at that. And so let's go into the DNA. Okay, I apologise, we have to do a little bit of this. Sorry?
Give a tag or something where you've collected it so that you can geo-track where they're going?
A little bit better. What we do when we request the person to submit the scat is take a photo of the tree, the koala or the scat, and send the photo to us through the email. We use the metadata of that photograph to GPS coordinate exactly where it came from and plot it that way. Yeah. So rather than someone say I was on the corner of here and the corner of there, and if you follow my wife's instructions, you'll never get to where you got to, right? So I apologise. but at least in this instance, we get the exact spot where it came from, and we are to coordinate with iNaturalist. Once we DNA profile a koala, and we've got it both on iNaturalist and with the DNA profile, we'll be able to say, haha, here's that koala on the landscape. So we think it's a really exciting project to start to connect these things together. So your education for tonight, DNA. So we know that DNA is found in the nucleus of every cell. Right? We know, going back to high school, Mendel's laws of inheritance. That means that, I apologise, half of your DNA is made up from your father and half is made up from your mother. So that means that if half my DNA is from my father and we can't find the father koala, we will be able to match it from the half DNA that I've got, and vice versa to the mother side as well, right? But what we're also doing is using, sorry, we've skipped that already. And so the other thing too is, of course, the way that it's inherited. The markers are inherited. So in this instance, we're using autosomal STRs. These are just DNA markers found throughout the chromosomes, exactly like a forensic DNA fingerprint. Right? And the DNA fingerprint that we get using autosomal markers is unique to every single individual except identical twins, which means every koala will have its own profile pretty much no matter what we do, unless of course they're twins as well. So we use autosomal markers, which can be used to look at the paternity, the maternity, sibling relationships, cousins, brothers, sisters, the same as we do for paternity testing and forensics. We're also using Y markers to identify from the male descendants, right? Just like you do at 23andMe and your genetic genealogy, we can identify Sir Francis Drake's descendants. And then mitochondrial DNA to identify the maternal family and its relationships. These are just the data to show how it all works. So it passes from the father to the son, passes from the mother to the offspring, and we get some sort of tree like this to help you identify which koalas are coming from where. So what we need is you guys. We have the schools doing it. We have some school groups, environmental groups, surveying their local reserves, and we have some people who are owning large properties with large populations of koalas who are submitting their scats. So we need you guys, or anybody interested, to submit their scats. So far we partner with the Queensland Government, both Education Queensland and the Department of Environment and Science, who both provided funding, Logan City Council, who also provided funding, Griffith University. The schools are these environmental groups. Sometimes we get emails from an individual who says, I want to do this, and we get them involved with their local reserves and so forth. And community groups who are out hiking, could be hiking groups, or it could be koala interest groups, who then send their scats in to us. How do you do it? Well, there is a postal address and there's a website. So we have a website. The website's very new. It'll change in the next week or two as I start updating more information to it. But using that prepaid address, you send it in for free. We DNA type it for free. You send in an email with the picture and any details you like, and we will send you back a report. We're still in the building phases. We're still growing and developing all these techniques. And so essentially, if you sent it in today, be patient. But by the end of the year, we'll be starting to process all these scats and give you back the data you like. And we think this is a very, very engaging citizen science program for the public to really manage their koalas and get involved in their local koalas and see who's passing through their properties, right? That's it for me, but if anyone is interested, I have scats. I don't know if we have time, but we most certainly will be able to check if Geoff can tell us what scat this is. Any ideas? You had your own scat collection. Does anyone know what that one is? What about this one? He's getting his glasses out. Come on, Shania, see what you can tell me here on this one. Challenging, aren't they? Not so easy. So that is rat, Geoff. Yep, rat scats. And you've got their possum, so that is, yeah. Well, my office was ransacked last week and the possum came in and just shat everywhere. So, and for those who have never seen them before, these are the koala scats, right? So for anyone, and they should be identical to yours there. Look at those beauties. Or a bit squashed, that's okay. DNA can still come out of them. So these types of images we're going to be putting on the website to help people find and identify their scats, right? Because the best thing, the best thing is if you see a koala in the tree, then you know it's there, right? But if you don't see the koala in the tree and you still want to give it a go, then we can do that as well, right?
That is absolutely fabulous. Thanks, Carney. And I haven't seen a room get so excited at poo. Just have to say it, like everyone started talking quite heavily. All right, we're going to move on to the question and answer phase for tonight. So you've heard a lot of different projects and efforts across a lot of different organisations, and it shows you just how complex the change that we need to see really is, because it's all arms, all areas of community, and a lot of conversations that spark even more challenges that we need to overcome. And the reality is most of those challenges are actually us causing it. So us as people, not you personally, not any, but the whole collective. And so figuring some of that out and trying to smash back down some of the barriers as fast as we can manage is really quite key to where we go as we move forward. So I would like to ask my speakers now to come and face the room and just line themselves up as we pop them into the firing line to get some of your questions answered. And you can well imagine the questions have been really diverse. We will not get through all questions in the room here tonight, but what our team will do is actually collate the questions and then put them to our speakers, and through the Q&A we'll actually pop them out through our newsletter and also through the Wildlife Watcher channel, so that those that did pose a question will endeavour our very best to get answers to nearly everything. So apologies if we don't have your direct question in the lineup, because we only have so much time and we do understand what this starts to take. So we have a question here from the Queensland, I believe, Koala Society. It's saying QKS. In terms of community engagement, mapping and reporting, is an app something that has been considered? Can I hand that to maybe Geoff?
Yep. Because that's one I can answer. So I'm pleased to say we actually have got a stage 1 of a koala sighting app currently under user acceptance testing within the department. So we've developed it based on the platform that's currently used by the department for its Crockwise sighting app. So the first phase of that app is intended to principally focus on collection of koala sightings, but we're working on a second stage of that app which will then integrate it with the way in which we deploy and provide advice into the care and rescue community as well. So similar to the way we do it with crocodiles, where if there's a crocodile report, that then triggers a response and a deployment of people to investigate. The intention in the second stage of that app is to actually have it so that it will link into the 1300 animal number and to the network of carers and others that are operating in that environment. But it'll also then contain that information similar to the croc sighting app, so that you can then look at where koalas have been rescued from, where they've been sighted, and also where they've been released. I think some of the groups here have probably been involved in some consultation already with regards to some of the policy changes we're doing in relation to the release of rehabilitated koalas. And one of the things that we're doing in that space with the app, as well as we will actually have mapping in the app to assist and guide the selection of sites for release of koalas that have been rehabilitated. So yeah, that's something we're really keen to roll out, and I'm hopeful that that first stage of the app will be out in the next couple of months. Well, it's going to be on the Q Wildlife is the name of the overall platform, and there's a crop watch component to it, and this will be the koala sighting.
Yeah, and the capacity for technology to get involved is huge. About 6.5 years ago, someone said, why can't we just have an app that just tells us when the koala's nearby? And if you think about location technology and what's possible, that is totally possible, because if you live in Brisbane City Council or you have insurance, they now today send you alerts saying get your car inside, hail's coming. So that's the capacity of what technology can do if we can coordinate and bring more effort together.
I was going to add one more thing to that, is that we have actually had conversations with Redland City Council, and they've been working with the University of Sunshine Coast. They're working on some small tags to deploy with koalas to again look at monitoring, and we're looking at the capability to potentially incorporate that into the app so that you'd actually time or monitor koalas in real time. So they're looking at a tag that's based on mobile phone technology, which would allow you to actually track in real time. Yeah.
So imagine your car signs, instead of just being these static displays, they actually say the koala's present, and by the time Carney or other teams have finished their work, it won't just be a koala, it'll be Bob the koala is present. So that's where it's kind of moving, as all of these efforts gradually get together with what works and keep pushing forward. Now, this is a question that's come from online, and I'm not sure who wants to answer this one, so I'm just going to pose it and then someone's going to have to volunteer. Wildlife parks and zoos are efforts out there that are doing some amazing work, and the question is, are they having a positive or negative effect on the conservation and reintroduction of koalas?
I'll take it if no one else will. Having worked in the industry.
Just grab that one. Yeah.
Good question. The main one of the there's three main roles that modern zoos and wildlife parks aim for is conservation, research and education, with education being the primary focus. So I think almost all wildlife parks and zoos are achieving public education and improving awareness. So yes, they're helping, because the community is the source of change for everything that everybody's talked about here. So I think the answer is yes.
I can add a little bit more, and that's, I guess, from a specific Queensland context. If we look at the main zoo facilities in Queensland that actually currently support significant numbers of koalas, so that would be Australia Zoo, Currumbin Wildlife Park, Dream World, Lone Pine, David Flay Wildlife Park. They're all actively involved in research relevant to koala conservation. So, and some of those institutions have over a significant period of time invested in that research and have been fundamental in developing our understanding of chlamydia and disease, and developing vaccines for the treatment of chlamydia, in trialling designs for road barriers to improve protection on road areas, in looking at reproduction technology associated with breeding of koalas that will then inform both how we breed them in captivity, but also potentially how we take genetic material from unique koalas in captivity and provide it back into the wild population. So yeah, I think in Queensland we've been very fortunate that they're contributing actively in that research sense towards conservation.
Well added to.
And look, as an educator, I can't speak enough about just the role of education. If we tell people 10% will act immediately, And then if we work on communication and a bit of what's in it for the other individual, we can get even more to actually sign up. So with that, this is a good segue into this question, and this is a really specific one. How can someone join the Ipswich Koala Protection Society?
You better answer that one.
Very easily. Go on the website. Use the QR code that we now have. Yay! Go on the website, click on membership, and go to the page. Pay your money, send in the email. Ka-ching. Come to all the meetings. Volunteer to be on the committee and be a support member. Come to all of our events. We need people that have got time and are interested, any sort of people. People in admin, you don't have to have any knowledge about koalas at all, just be prepared to become obsessed.
Just a couple of different things different people do.
Different things different people do. Well, there's Tashimi over there. She was roped in to become a temporary interim treasurer. She does monthly financial reports. Is her background financial? Is her background in being obsessed with koalas? Yeah. One of the things I do is go and talk to people about poo, scats, and how they can walk around their property or somewhere and find koalas. What we feed koalas, what an ironbark that's a narrow-leafed ironbark looks like compared to a tallow or a spotted gum. Smell this leaf. Out and off we go for a walk and see what we can find. Yeah, that's what I do. We have people that rescue koalas, hand-raised koalas, hand-raised birds, rescue possums, write newsletters, if anybody wants to do that. Come on down.
That's great, thank you. All right, another question here. It's a slightly tricky one, so I don't know who else would love to jump in and try and answer this one, but the koala might be the mascot for the 2032 Olympics. So how can we use that to our advantage and get some more people experiencing more koalas out there in the wild?
I'm just a little bit enthused. I live sort of vaguely adjacent to where some of the infrastructure is going in. At the same time, I can go for a walk and find koala poo scats. And so I think what would be great is to get a commitment from the community, maybe an individual commitment out there, like I think it was Erin was talking about on your stall, where kids write down what they might do, to work towards having secure koala populations by the time that Olympics comes. You know, how embarrassing is it going to be where everyone comes on down and we go, okay, yeah, we've got them in zoos, you can't see them anywhere else now. Sorry, we didn't think about that. Yeah, so that's what I'd be doing, trying to inspire everybody towards that, not just the sports side of things, but the environment side of things.
Unfortunately, I'm dominating, but I'll add a little bit extra there, is that the other theme for the Olympics is to be the Green Olympics. So again, I think it provides a complementary opportunity, because if the koala were to be, and I can't confirm or deny that that's something the Queensland Government might be considering, then such a strong symbol like that connected with an Olympics that's intended to be green and demonstrate sustainability and environmental outcomes, there's a logic in preserving and demonstrating a serious commitment to koala conservation. It's also worth noting that, again, through the First Nations action plan that we've done, the First Nations group was again keen that if you were to adopt the koala as a symbol for the Olympics, that there was also an opportunity to share First Nations knowledge, aspirations and involvement in that process of conservation for koalas as well. So there's a real passion within that group to see that happen.
And hopefully it wouldn't be a blue koala.
That's right.
Yeah, we would hope not. Erin, what are the actions that some community members do sign up for when you're out there chatting?
Some things that you can sign up for as an individual. Look, what we've just talked about, volunteer, donate, help out your local wildlife organisation. You know, there's different things you can do around your home, definitely as well. You know, lots of people are unaware that koalas can drown in swimming pools, so making sure you have some sort of escape in your swimming pool, just throwing a rope in there, making sure they can get out of your backyard, you know, having something up against your fence so that a koala can climb out of it. I think a really interesting one that I'll share, you know, when we looked at the data, we found that okay, there are people that know that I should report a koala, but then from that percentage that know this, there's a high percentage that aren't actually reporting koalas when they see them. You know, it's not just the sick and injured koalas that you report, it's the healthy ones too. So whatever data that they can get on the populations is really important. So if you see a koala, don't just put it on Instagram, report it as well.
All right, now this one is for every speaker, so I'm just going to wander down the end, hand the mic across and let them all come back through, but to give their own perspective. So the final question that we're actually going to end on tonight is that I want each speaker to tell us about the one action that they would love to see community take. So I'm just going to let them reflect for just a moment, because it's a tricky question, that one. What's their one key takeaway? The one thing you would like to see? Sorry to put you on the spot first.
Yeah.
It gets harder as it comes this way. What Geoff said.
I would say the one key takeaway that personally I think is valuable is we've talked a lot about koalas in terms of restoration and whatnot, but that overall restoration doesn't just help koalas, it helps a range of species and the ecosystems as a whole. So I think using the koalas for overall restoration would be the key theme, I'd say.
I'm going to take that and be more specific. Plant trees. Koalas grow on trees.
I'm going to touch on something that Rosie mentioned before, and that's, I guess, the ability of the community to influence the politics and the decisions that are made by people in that landscape. And I think, again, a key thing is that we're continuing to lose koala habitat, and we're losing koala habitat because planning and development allows that to continue to happen. And the only way in which that stops is by changing legislation, changing planning frameworks, and that really is driven by the community, particularly at local government level, by voting in councils that support the conservation of koala habitat, and by kicking out councils that don't. It's a really important thing in terms of that system to actually have a voice.
You won't agree with you.
Well, see, I stole your idea.
So I would, we've all got to choose something different, see, as it comes down the line, so it's got to go different. So I'm going to choose education, educating people, educating the community, whether it be schools, primary schools, community groups, sending that message out and that word out to get people involved, and being very selfish. And if you want to get involved, just send me your scats. So not yours, koala scats, but...
For me, the most important thing is to reconnect the habitat, not just for koalas, but for all of biodiversity, and not just trees, all of the plants involved in the habitat. So reconnect the habitat. And part of the reason to do that is to allow the genetics of the koala to return to something more diverse. So back to you.
Just building on what Rebecca said about planting a tree, most land around us is in private ownership, so it's the community that can also make a real difference in that space. Even if you've got a tiny garden, council's got their Habitat Gardens program, everything through to signing up for a koala partnership as well. So I would encourage people to take advantage of that. You can get free plants and make the most of that, what's available.
Oh dear. I was going to say plant a tree and then education. And then I gave away some when my question came around. Look, I think just being aware perhaps that as an individual you can make a change. You know, it's not always about, you know, the larger things. There are these little things that you can do yourself around your home and in your neighbourhood to really help koalas. And look, just learning more about them. It's been amazing what I've learned since being on this project. That's just eye-opening. So the more you know, the more empowered you are. You spread the word.
Well, I think that's a really nice take home. I think the Australian government, hidden report that didn't come out before the election but later did, that says the state of our nation environmentally is declining and rapidly, says more of us need to care. Now, I don't need to speak to all of you that have been here tonight, but the work that we try and do is to get the other people who may never have thought about this, and you've heard it, our team has learnt so much. They now can spot koalas and see koalas, and we weren't environmentally trained. So that's the task that we have at hand, to get more people to look up, take notice and care. And hearing one of my team members recently, as we were doing some testing of materials, someone said, I can't quite see that koala on the road. Her absolute observation to that was, that's the point. They're not easy to see. So trying to help people become more aware of when and how and what else they can do, because we know from climate change research that if we just talk about problems, we make people feel helpless. So share solutions. The more of us talk about what's possible. You can go to council, you can even get free trees. That's a no-brainer for some people now. It's easy. Oh, yuck. And obviously I don't like rats. So with no further ado, I'm going to sign off for the online group and say bye while we go and chase the rat. For the people in the room, you're welcome to hang around and ask a few more questions and to have a chat. And for our speakers, don't move. You have to get your photo taken together. So thank you, everybody.